Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and I'm here to help you make the most of Rastakhan's Rumble on a budget. I know not every player out there can open hundreds of packs. You may not have a huge collection, and that's okay. You can still play competitive Hearthstone and have tons of fun with just a few new cards, a pack here and there, some gold, some arcane dust. It doesn't take much to go a really long way in Hearthstone, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video: how to make the most of your resources, some cool decks you might want to play, and ways you might be able to build a deck using, for instance, your free legendary Loa or the accompanying spirits that you get just for logging into Hearthstone during the Rastakhan's Rumble launch. We're going to talk about all of it. And before we do, that said, I want to cover real quickly, there are essentially two ways to go about playing on a budget in Hearthstone. One of those is playing pre-made budget decks that somebody like myself has put together, or alternatively, you can build your own with cards that you already have access to if you're really looking to save. And that can be a good experience just to learn and grow as a Hearthstone player as well. Both are viable options. You can do either one that you prefer. We're going to talk about both in this video. Now, that said, let's go ahead and talk about one of the pre-made decks that I mentioned. This is a mid-range hunter list, and it's really not a budget deck by design. It just happens to be a real deck that's fairly affordable at 4,000 arcane dust. Now, that may still seem like an insurmountable amount of dust for you right now. That's okay. I've got a cheaper deck coming next, but there are many decks in Hearthstone that are much, much more expensive than that. This one only has a couple legendaries in it, so it's a fairly accessible goal that will still allow you to compete at an incredibly high level, maybe even play all the way up to legend ranks if you're a really skilled Hearthstone player. So this mid-range hunter in particular, it features the new card Halazi the Lynx as one of its key features, but it also has some other new Rastakhan's Rumble cards like Spring Paw and Headhunter's Hatchet in combination with a lot of staple mid-range hunter style cards. And if you're unfamiliar with mid-range hunter as an archetype, it's essentially a deck that plays out pretty quickly, has a lot of aggression, a lot of minion-based damage, with some really heavy-hitting stuff in the mid-game, which gives it its mid-range title. And in this case in particular, you can start off with some really good one-drop beasts that lead you into very powerful turn twos like Crackling Razor Maw and Scavenging Hyena. Hyena in particular has great synergies with Spring Paw and Halazi the Lynx. The Rush Lynxes allow you to take off trades really nicely and buff your Scavenging Hyena to make it this incredibly intimidating threat. Also, Unleash the Hounds matches that really nicely as well. So all of it kind of fits together to give you these scary hyenas that can absolutely win games by themselves if you look for those opportunities. Following up on that, we have strong turn 3 cards like Bear Shark and Vicious Fledgling, which just create a lot of problems for your opponent. And those, of course, work really nicely with things like Houndmaster, buffing them on turn 4, or Flanking Strike, protecting them on turn 4 so they can live to do a lot of increasing damage. And then finally, sort of the two crowning pieces of this deck are Halazi the Lynx, which just gives you tons of reload and synergizes with all kinds of different pieces in this deck. And then finally, Deathstalker Rexar, which is the ultimate value card for Hunter. If all else fails, you can play Deathstalker Rexar, create zombies every single turn, and play your opponent out to fatigue all the time, winning games that you otherwise would just never be able to contest. So you have this primary game plan of playing fast, hitting your opponent hard, and some backup plans with Halazi or Deathstalker Rexar if you need a little bit of extra value to get over the hump. So you really can't go wrong with a deck like this. It's been working very well for me in the early Rastakhan's Rumble meta, but if you don't have 4,000 dust, if that still seems like way too much, I do have an alternative list for you here. This is an Egg Zoo Warlock that comes in under 1,500 dust, which makes it really, really affordable. That's something that most new and growing Hearthstone players, with just a few days of playing out games, saving your gold up, buying some packs, disenchanting extra cards you don't need, you can get to that dust total very easily. And this deck will still provide you a nice way to climb up the ladder. Maybe you won't quite make it all the way to legend unless you're very, very skilled or you make a few key replacements, but you'll still win games, you'll find success, you'll complete your quests, so on and so forth. And this deck borrows from the Zoo Warlock archetype, which is also very popular like mid-range hunter throughout Hearthstone's history, but it changes a few things with the Rastakhan's Rumble card additions of things like Grim Rally, Scarab Egg, and Spirit of the Bat. All three of these essentially contribute to this buff sacrifice style where you trade off a minion, you sacrifice your minions so that you can create bigger and better minions elsewhere. So for instance, Grim Rally, you kill something to buff your board. With Spirit of the Bat, every minion that dies will buff a minion in your hand. And then you have all these minions in your deck that really benefit from being buffed. Things like, for instance, Serenite Chain Gang and doubling it. Because they double themselves, any buffs they receive are doubled in effect, making them very, very scary when they get really big boards. And you also have minions that you like to sacrifice. Things like Scarab Egg and Devilsaur Egg. You're happy to kill those because you get a nice reward when they die. And then, of course, minions that actually sacrifice those, like Ravenous Pterodax. So essentially, you've got all of these pieces that combine to give you these really fast starts, these minions that grow to incredible stat totals because you're just buffing them over and over again, which allows you to create just gigantic boards. By turn 4 or 5, you can play these really scary things that your opponent just can't answer. You leverage those things to do lots of damage and pressure your opponent so that you eventually just kill them because they can't handle all of that stuff. And for 1500 dust, this is a really good deck. This is a strong core, an archetype that's well proven and something that you can work with and grow with too. You can make key replacements as you get better, as you learn the deck. You might find some cards that fit or you think work well. So this serves as a great starting point that, you know, you can grow on and improve. And I think that's really important for a pre-made budget deck because you don't want to be completely stuck or locked into a list. It needs to have room to improve. And that's exactly what this can provide. So now that we've talked about each of these pre-made lists and, you know, we've got some options to decide between, the next thing I want to talk about is building your own deck. Because although this list looks nice, maybe you don't have these cards, maybe you don't want to commit this dust. And I know that if you're playing Hearthstone right now and you've logged in during the Rastakhan's Rumble launch, you will have received a free Legendary Loa and the spirits for that Loa, which means you have a nice little core to start building a deck around. So I wanted to go through each of the Legendary Loas in Rastakhan's Rumble and identify essentially the synergy that those cards are capturing and some affordable budget cards that might play nicely with them. Now, these aren't going to be complete lists by any means. You're going to have to fill these in with additional pieces. I just wanted to help get you started, get the gears turning in your brain a little bit so you can start building decks. So that said, let's start off with Gonk the Raptor and the Spirit of the Raptor. Of course, Gonk, all about synergizing with hero power attacks. So as you're looking through your collection, you should look for cards that support buffing your hero power attack. And there are a few really affordable ones in the basic set. Savage Roar and Claw are completely free and are both viable cards to support Gonk and Spirit of the Raptor. You've also got Pounce in Rastakhan's Rumble, a new card that's very cheap to play and gives you a quick infusion of attack, which makes both of these cards much more exciting. Now, as far as building a deck around all these pieces, that's still being solved a little bit here in the Rastakhan's Rumble meta. There are some sneaky ways to play it. They require a lot more support, but really any deck that just has a smooth minion curve where you play early game minions up to mid game minions up to Gonk and have that card draw options from Spirit of the Raptor is going to give you some ways to make this work. You'll be using your hero power essentially to keep your opponent's board in check while you develop your own threats, and then eventually you just hope to overpower them with a consistent curve and pressure. So look for building out a deck that just has a smooth minion, 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana, 4 mana drops, etc., so that you can play these out in a sensible fashion. And if you also go wide on the board, things like Savage Roar can help. So smaller minions or minions that have multiple instances, things like Firefly, for instance, can work great with Savage Roar. So a couple options to keep in mind there. That said, let's talk about Hunter. We already pretty much covered this a little bit in our pre-made Hunter deck there. The same sorts of cards support Halazi the Lynx in that list are budget options that work really well. I tossed one extra one in here, the Hunting Mastiff, because it has Rush, much like the Lynxes from Spring Paw or Halazi itself. That works really, really nicely to buff things like Scavenging Hyena. But with Spirit of the Lynx in particular, you like playing lots and lots of minions. So anytime you summon a beast with Spirit of the Lynx, it gets a buff. So with Unleash the Hounds, it's amazing. With Hunting Mastiff, if you can summon multiple rushing Hunting Mastiffs, it's amazing. Spring Paw, it's great. Halazi itself, it's great. So the more you can play lots of things and turn those things into value via something like Scavenging Hyena or just taking good trades or doing lots of face damage, the better off you're going to be. So you've already seen exactly what a Hunter list looks like. All of these cards fit it nicely, and it should be pretty easy to build something good. Just note that with Spirit of the Lynx, it does need to be beasts in order for them to get buffed, so focus, of course, on having beast minions. After that, we will head over to Mage and Jan'alai the Dragonhawk, which if you use your hero power enough with Jan'alai or do enough damage at least, you will summon Ragnaros the Fire Lord, one of my favorite things in Hearthstone. And then the Spirit helps you do that by making your hero power target adjacent minions, so you can essentially ping 3 times per hero power instead of just 1, which means 3 damage instead of 1, making it much quicker to activate your Jan'alai. So clearly these two support each other, and there are some other cards in standard format right now that work really nicely with each of these cards. Daring Fire Eater from Rastakhan's Rumble is fantastic. Makes that hero power deal 3 damage by default, which is really, really good at clearing boards with Spirit of the Dragonhawk, but also just ups the ante on Jan'alai, making sure Jan'alai is active by turn 7 when you really want to play it. Then we've also seen Ice Walker work successfully in this deck. If you want to be a little bit more defensive and freeze stuff off, you can combine these cards together. That's only a couple cards, I know, but the good news is that really just between Spirit of the Dragonhawk and Jan'alai, they work so well together that you don't necessarily need a lot of extra support. You could just add a 3-card package together here and just run a normal mage deck with just spells and aggressive minions, whatever you think fits your style of play. And Jan'alai will slot right in. You can put it into a slower control deck. You can even put it as the top end on a more aggressive deck because Ragnaros does represent so much potential for damage. So you don't have to do a lot to make this one work. Just a few cards. Dropping it into any deck could make it really, really powerful. So Jan'alai is a particularly good tool to have on a budget. So up next now, let's talk about the Paladin Loa, Shirval the Tiger, and Spirit of the Tiger. And for these, it's really just all about casting high-cost spells. Really, the bigger the spell, the better. To discount your Shirvala, to get bigger minions summoned off your Spirit of the Tiger. And the basic Paladin set does have a couple reasonably high-cost spells like Consecration, Blessing of Kings. 4 mana is a pretty good spot, getting 4 4s out of your Spirit of the Tiger, each of them allowing you to make cool plays. Sound the Bells can also be great because you get a lot of little tigers in that instance, but you can also buff your Spirit of the Tiger to really high health totals so that it survives. There are lots of other spell options for Paladin that are expensive. Most of them are rare or epic cost, so they may not naturally be something you want to aim towards or craft, but if you happen to have one of those, things like Spike Ridge Steed or the Rastakhan's Rumble card, a new Challenger, those could work really well to support these 2 cards as well. So just look through your collection and see what fits. Things like Secrets, for instance, in Paladin probably won't go far enough for your Spirit of the Tiger. Just summoning a 1/1 is far less exciting than some of these bigger options. Would also just take forever to discount your Shirvala. But you don't have to just run spells to make this work. You still need minions. You still need a normal deck style to just slot these into. You can have a reasonable amount of spells, but don't go too deep. Just be careful. Look at some other lists and model what they've accomplished instead of just trying to go all in on Spirit of the Tiger. That just won't work. So moving on, let's talk about Priest and Bwonsamdi and Spirit of the Dead here, which with Spirit of the Dead, it's all about killing your minions, trading them in. They get added to your deck as 1-cost copies, and then Bwonsamdi can draw 1-cost copies. So anything you trade in and add to your deck while Spirit of the Dead is on board, Bwonsamdi is going to draw that and give it right back to you. So it's this really cool 1-2 punch. And you'll note here, I didn't show any actual cards. I just showed some question marks. And that doesn't mean there are no cards that support these. It really just means any minion works here. It doesn't really matter what kind of minion it is. It can still do some cool stuff because whatever it is, if it's dying on board, Spirit of the Dead is going to add it to the deck and Bwonsamdi is going to draw it. So really, it's kind of an open book. Whatever you want to play in Priest, these 2 cards can help support it. Now, obviously, cards with strong effects like Battle Cries or really good Death Rattles might go a little farther than just statted minions because you might want to utilize those Battle Cries multiple times. So look through your collection, identify Battle Cries that you might like to have multiple copies of. Go that route if you need to. Maybe alternatively, Death Rattles are really good to trade in with Spirit of the Dead. You don't mind losing those stats on board as much if you're getting Death Rattle value out of them. So look for Death Rattles that could fit here too. But ultimately, whatever minions you like, whatever style of Priest you've played previously, if you want to model a real Priest deck with, substitute minions, you can just toss these 2 cards in and you're probably still going to be able to make them work in a pretty cool way. So just whatever you like, it's all up to you with Bwonsamdi the Dead. So now let's move on to Grawl the Shark and Spirit of the Shark. And with these 2, for Grawl, it's all about Battle Cries. For Spirit of the Shark, it's really Battle Cries or combos getting doubled, but only on minions, keep in mind, not on spells. But in both cases, clearly they go well together. If you play Spirit of the Shark on turn 4, Grawl is going to follow up naturally on turn 5 and get a ton of stats and maybe eventually draw you a card, which is a great play typically if that's what your deck is designed to do. As long as it doesn't get silenced, you're typically going to get a good result there. But you can also, of course, go into your collection and find lots of cards that have really strong Battle Cries and really strong combo effects. Rogue has tons of combos. There's a lot of Battle Cry minions in the neutral set as well. I've identified a few here like Blink Fox, Lab Recruiter, Cutthroat Buccaneer. Each of these kind of goes a different direction in what they do or what they're trying to accomplish, but each of them as a common card is very affordable. So you can kind of see, do I go for a thief style of rogue where I try to burgle stuff, or get cards from my opponent's class, or I go for like a value shuffle rogue with lab recruiter. Maybe I go for a weapon build. If I have a good weapon I want to build around for Cutthroat Buccaneer, there's a lot of different directions to go, but Spirit of the Shark and Grawl could still fit in to support those battle cries. You just need to make sure that whatever battle cry or combo you're doubling is really worth it, because Spirit of the Shark is a pretty big play at 4 mana. That's a large commitment to your mana. So the bigger and the better the battle cry is, the more real value Spirit of the Shark's going to give you. If you're just giving it little baby battle cries that don't really do much, you may be sacrificing too much tempo or mana to play Spirit of the Shark and not really getting enough return on that investment. Just keep that in mind as you're building a deck. And then up next here, we have Krogwa the Frog and Spirit of the Frog. And with these two, it's all about crazy spell synergy. Spirit of the Frog in particular means you can chain spells. If you cast a 1 mana spell, you're going to draw a 2 mana spell, which you can then cast, and then you're going to draw a 3 mana spell, which you can cast, and you'll draw a 4 mana spell. So obviously, as you're building a Spirit of the Frog deck, you should look for those escalating mana cost spells to add into your deck. And I got a couple examples here. Lightning Bolt's really cheap. Rockbiter Weapon's a good follow-up for that. If you're building a damage-based deck where you're trying to do a ton of damage to your opponent, you can start to chain those together. Maybe you have Lava Burst at 3 mana. That'd be a really natural follow-up. If you don't, maybe you have an alternative that would still fit in there. Something like Farsight, for instance. But maybe you don't want to go for damage. Maybe you want to go for value, and you have a different set of spells that work. As long as you have that ladder that escalates step by step, Spirit of the Frog is going to be a great way to draw into your resources. And then Krogwa essentially means, oh, cool, I get to double those resources. If I play Krogwa right after playing all my spells, I get them back. So you can do this really cool thing where you just get a ton of damage or a ton of value. However you want to build it, these two cards work really naturally together. And Shaman has a wide array of spells that can help you support these two cards. So it's up to you. The sky's the limit. Whatever cards you have that fit, you can start to build something really cool around these two. Moving on to Warlock here, we have Hyreek the Bat and Spirit of the Bat. And again, these are two cards we talked about a little bit, or at least we talked about Spirit of the Bat a little bit in my pre-made super budget deck. Hyreek the Bat is the Loa that works especially well with that same style of play that we already discussed. Because if you can get some buffs on your Hyreek the Bat, it's going to be this huge board swing anytime you play. You're going to be summoning 7/5/5 minions. I've gotten 11/11 Hyreeks already. So I got 11/11 Hyreeks. That's 77/77 in total stats for 8 mana, which is completely bonkers, and it just instantly won me the game. But you'd still need the supporting cards to help get your Hyreek that big and help play a deck style that still makes sense. So of course I have a couple examples here, and you can refer back to that previous list as well earlier in the video to see even more. But things like Sanguine Reveler, Ravenous Pterodax are great at sacrificing minions to combo with your Spirit of the Bat. And then Doubling Imp is there, sort of a mini Hyreek the Bat, right? Where you can still, if you get buffs on it, you're not feeling too bad. It's still a really strong turn 3 play. And we saw many other examples. So altogether, this is a neat little set of cards, and you can build some cool stuff on a budget. If you got Hyreek, you could just toss it right into that list I showed earlier, and it's going to work nicely. So I think this is a great option to get for budget players if you got it. And then finally here we have a Warrior with Akali the Rhino and Spirit of the Rhino. And these two are all about rush synergies. You can protect your rush minions with Spirit of the Rhino. You can make your rush minions huge with Akali. And clearly there are a lot of rush minions in Hearthstone these days. So you can just take your pick. You need to make sure that you have a good curve whenever you're building a rush minion deck. Things like Vicious Scalehide, Rabid Worgen are great for the early game. You can even move towards things like Amani Warbear to really get the value out of that immunity because you're playing a taunt minion. So the more health it has, the better it is at defending you, taking an instant trade as well with Spirit of the Rhino. So a mix there of smaller stuff and bigger stuff that leads up towards Akali as maybe like a finishing piece or one of the higher cost cards in your deck would be perfect. And you don't want only rush minions perhaps, but having a nice assortment there to make sure your Spirit of the Rhino is giving you consistent value would go a long way. But you need to make sure the deck is board focused first and foremost, because you're going to need those minions and leverage those minions into pressuring down your opponent. But if that works, Akali can create some pretty good plays in the late game where you just get a huge dude that your opponent simply can't handle. For instance, like a 10-12 Amani Warbear, that could be nuts. So although I think this one's a little bit more challenging than some of these other cards as far as building a good cohesive list, you can still find some success, test, experiment a little bit, see what works, and I think you'll find a deck that you really enjoy playing. And that said, guys, that wraps it up for each of the Loa class legendaries. I think using that little guide there, those little discussion points, you might be able to kick off into a pretty cool deck. And you might say, well, Regis, why didn't you just give me a deck list for every one of those Loas? And there's a reason for that. It's because I, first off, maybe don't have time to make a perfectly refined budget deck list for all 9 Loas. But more importantly is the fact that I really think encouraging, new and growing players, people on a budget who maybe don't play as much as somebody like me, encouraging those people, encouraging you perhaps to build your own deck goes a long way towards making you a better Hearthstone player. You start to see how things work. You start to understand why certain elements are important to have, why you need certain removal tools. You need tempo plays. You need a good smooth curve. You need all these different things to work together, and you'll start to see those pieces like, oh man, this card just seems like it never works very well. It's always sitting in my hand. It's not doing much. You replace that card for something else. You see how that works. You see new synergies. You see all these different angles that you don't always see when you just play a copy-pasted deck list. And there's nothing wrong with playing a copy-pasted deck list. It's just your opportunity for getting better might be a little lower than somebody who goes out there and ventures forth to build their own stuff using their own cards. On top of that, I think it's just fun to play cards you already own. Like, you opened those, they're yours, you have an attachment to them. Maybe you really have good fond memories with them. Turning those into a cool new deck, that can be a great experience. So, although I would encourage you to try to build your own stuff using your own legendary Loa, please feel free to consult those budget decks that I linked as well. Those are both going to be in the description below for the deck codes, and I think they'll take you a long way too. You can still learn a lot, you can still grow, so no shame there either. All that said, guys, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments on the lists I provided, my insights on the Loa, please don't hesitate to share them in the comments below. I may not be able to answer comments directly all the time. I'm a very busy man these days with Rastakhan's Rumble, but I know my community will provide lots of great feedback, and they'll give you insights, answer any questions you might have. So it's still a great resource down there in the comments if you have a good question. All that said, though, thank you so very much for watching. Good luck out there in the Rastakhan's Rumble, and until next time, game on.